It's been one of my dreams that we would come together and realize our common trouble and the power of poor people, but really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the ability to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. And it is my hope that we will get together and be together and really stand up to gain power for poor people.
Poverty and being close to poverty or low wealth or any of those things. So much of it was like this precariousness.
For me to get a good paying job has been more than difficult. And with the economy as steep as it is right now, I can really afford to buy my kids dinner, let alone live comfortably.
It's honestly, it's argument, it's income. Income will not ever catch up with the cost of the life.
My name is Marcus, belongs to the homeless, and I'm here today in honoring of homeless lives. So we understand that we have institutionalized racism in governments and systems, and people fall on hard times. You know what I'm saying? And not just, there's all types of people that fall on hard times. Everybody deserves a second chance.
Back in 1975, as a high school graduate, age 17, I joined the Army as a quick means of making an income to help my family and help us be lifted out of poverty.
I was able to Vietnam, police station. So, we were kids, we were innocent, they made us into killers, and then they said, well, goodbye, we don't need you anymore.
We have so many highways that are not being crossed. Many of the children are born with asthma, so respiratory problems are rampant in the Bronx.
My name is Tony Thompson from the Chicago Territory, East Carolina, New York. I'm talking to you from the land of dangerous overdevelopment. Our water was poisoned by outside farmers, and so our water is no longer potable. Our soil is poisoned, and we keep not being heard, but we're also going to remain here and keep sharing the words that are ours to share.
Oh, my head, I hear music in the air. Oh, my head, I hear music in the air.
Minimum wage rich for something that benefits everybody and people live comfortably.
Compared to me now, one fair wage, I would say at least 25. You know, which is hard. Well, six.
We're not asking for much. We're asking for what is our right. Our right to live to live with dignity, to live with healthy life that we deserve.
You have a real problem here is that the disparities we have. That's the bottom line. And it is my problem. And you have to be. Oh, my head. I think that it's in the air.
I appreciate the work, past, present, and future of the local campaign. I really believe in the mission.
This is like all our fight. This is everybody's problem. If you only hear what people are in United States, you're not going the landlords, the realtors, the people controlling, and keep the people in house.
We band together. It's not bad. Oh, my head.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Emmanuel Baptist Church, and welcome to the Poor People's Campaign State of the State Address or rebuttal to Governor Kathy Hochul's State of the State Address. On behalf of the Poor People's Campaign and Emmanuel Baptist Church, I would like to say thank you for coming out and thank you for showing up and making a difference in our world. I would like to just let you know that here in Rochester, the PPC, the philosophy that I've adopted as one of the co-coordinators is to work in conjunction and collaboration with other community organizations, that we all work cooperatively together and that we work on behalf of each other's issues, which are all interlocking. So as that in mind, I invited people from Metro Justice, from Citizens Action, from Vocal New York, from all of the different organizations to come and speak on the topics that they're working on and issues that they're addressing. And to launch this off, I would like to say that one of the people who mentored me in this process was a retired minister, John McNeil. He and his wife, Martha, and one of their children are actually very active in the Poor People's Campaign. And so I asked John if he would take time to actually write a letter to the editor in response to Governor Hochul's State of the State Address. And I'd just like to share John's words with you, and those best represent our message in the Poor People's Campaign. While Governor Hochul's State of the State Address raised many topics of concern, the governor did not sufficiently address the increasingly obvious reality for nearly half of all New Yorkers, namely poverty. Whether we look at the United Way's, ALICS reports, access limited income constrained, employed, or recent comprehensive report of New York State Poor People's Campaign, we find that across the state, New Yorkers are struggling to make ends meet, whether we talk about children, elder care, or housing costs. They are dramatically outstripping resources. Governor Hochul's State of the State Address diverts our attention. New York's problems will not be solved by giving taxpayers money to real estate developers to build new housing, tweaking the minimum wage, or increasing police funding. We need leadership to address the hardship of poverty and low incomes, the cruelty of mass incarceration, the injustice of no-cause evictions, and welfare sanctions, along with all the other dimensions of the war on the poor. When we lift from the bottom, we first must listen to the voices speaking from the bottom. Bella Calderon of One Fair Wage says, "I've been working in the restaurant industry for 10 years, working sometimes 7 days, making maybe just $200 a week. And if you're working but you don't get decent pay, your life is miserable. You cannot stretch that salary for so many things that you have to do. We live in a political and economic system that divides the haves from the have-nots. And that division makes it difficult for the haves to see the trouble, those in our society who are disempowered and marginalized. Those who find themselves at the edges with their backs against the wall because of poverty, racism, ecological devastation, and militarism are the view from the powers that be." These are just some of the words that he shared in his letter to the editors, and this is the message that we'd like to share with you from a different variety of perspectives. So for our first speaker up this evening, I invited the Reverend Myra Brown of Spiritus Christi Church here in Rochester, who's one of our strongest advocates and leaders for social justice in our community. Reverend Brown has worked on an issue of the Crescent Map and creating 5 majority black district seats. 6, excuse me, oops, I've been corrected. I stand corrected. And she's going to come and bless us with a word about the work that she's done. So no further ado, I'd like to welcome Reverend Myra Brown to the podium.
so much for having me. And I just want to say that the work that has happened in this community is not work that I have done alone. It's all been work done in coalition. There were many, many people in this community that helped us get to that success. So I just want to tell you a little bit about how we got there and what the issue was at hand. And so, you know, in our community in Rochester, we learned in the beginning of September that we had a civil rights issue that was happening for Black voters in this community. President Sabrina Lamar of our county legislature realized that the legislature had a responsibility to look at the census data, which happens every 10 years, and then be guided by Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to enfranchise a minority group if in fact they showed a population growth of 50% or more. That group then was able to ask itself a series of questions called the Gingrich Standard Test to see if they were entitled to more proportionality of representation. And that those three questions would be to be geographically compact enough to comprise a majority in a district, and what it found was that only Black voters made up a majority of at least 50% of their voting districts. They must also be proven to be politically cohesive and show that there was a pattern of voting together, and Black voters could answer yes to that as well. And then the third thing on the Gingrich test was to say, can white voters have the power to vote together to block the minority group of its preferred candidate? And the data showed that that was true as well. And so Black voters in this county were entitled to at least 5, potentially 6 Black majority voting districts from what we previously had, which was majority minority districts. And people say, well, what's the difference? Majority minority districts put all minorities together in a district, and it forced them to vote for its coalition to get the representative of their choice. And it assumes that all minorities kind of vote together and have the same interests. It's a very racist structure, but that's what we have, and so that's what we have in this community. But according to the census data and the Voting Rights Act, Black voters were entitled to have the Black vote freed. And so we started a campaign, Free the Black Vote, so that Black voters could have their independent Black majority voting districts and not be incarcerated into these 6 majority minority districts. And so we began that fight, and you know, to our own disappointment, we met obstructionism, we met resistance, we met anti-Black anxiety that was happening, self-interest. Generally in the country at that time, you know, Democrats in other states, in other cities were allies to Black voters. And Rochester was unique in that Sabrina Lamar was able to get the Republicans in the county to support these Black majority voting districts, but it was the Democrats, our own party, that was doubling down and resisting supporting these districts. And so we won this campaign after months of standing with President Lamar, who brought this issue to the community and brought it to our attention. And she rightly began to lead a process of bipartisan enfranchisement for the Black vote. I worked as a pastor and community organizer in partnership with Sabrina and an amazing woman, Robin Wilkes, 2 elected Black women officials to build community coalitions to free the Black vote and enfranchise Black voters into 5 Black majority voting districts. And we won that battle after several months of organizing our community, untangling misinformation campaigns that came from some of the legislators in the chamber within the power structure who opposed us bringing clarity to the community. And one way to keep justice from moving forward is to create enough confusion where people decide, you know, this is too complicated, so I'm just gonna stand on the sidelines and see how it kind of works out. And so we knew it was important to bring clarity to the confusion that was being intentionally put out into the community. We knew that it was important to name that there was self-interest happening. It was important to name that there was political patronage going on and obstructionism to thwart the efforts of the collective Black community being enfranchised. The power structure, when we took our fight to the streets, we then took our fight to the television media, we took our fight to social media, we took our fight to the streets, we took our fights door to door to families and ordinary folks in this community so that everybody could understand what was at stake here. The power structure pushed back and they brought in white experts in redistricting to decenter the Black voice and to tell Black voters what we needed using the art of paternalism. We encountered that and we began to challenge the designation of expert, and we recentered the Black voice. We challenged false narratives. We challenged voices and organizations of opposition, and we met with those who opposed us. And we brought clarity to those who were on the fence. We reached out and we built coalition partners with Black pastors, the Black Agenda Group, SPARC, Spiritus Christi, the local NAACP, the Black Community Focus Fund, the Urban League, Bain Street Settlement, and the larger collective Black community and white allies who saw this justice issue of voting rights embedded in redistricting from the start. And I will tell you that we won the vote for the 5 Black majority voting districts only to contend with a veto by our county executive. But we didn't let that stop us. Left with no choice, we along with our Black coalition partners filed a lawsuit to secure our Black voting rights. And we learned in that process that not only were we entitled to 5 Black majority voting districts, but we were entitled to 6. And so with the pressure of winning the PR campaign and building strong coalition partnerships, refusing to go away, refusing to compromise, refusing to back up, and we forced the legislatures to finally come together and agree on a bipartisan redistricting map that comprised of 6 majority Black voting districts, and we freed the Black vote. For our county. It matters because it not only allowed Black voters to select the candidates of their choice and leaders who will listen to them, but it allowed the possibility for resources in these poor communities. This Crescent area was named the Crescent Map because there's a particular history of discrimination and disenfranchisement. And so it matters that in these communities where families and children and individuals are steeped in poverty, that you have leaders in those seats who will hear their needs, who will listen to those communities, who will provide the resources for education, to reduce violence, to lift people out of poverty. And so this issue wasn't just a political issue while some politicians wanted to reduce it to that. This was really about real lives. The ability for an entire community and several communities and districts to actually have the possibility of thriving. We have in our county 29 voting districts, and we were asking for 6. And so if we were asking for 6 Black majority voting districts, that meant that there were 23 white majority voting districts. And so there's still a lot of work here left to be done. And the beginning of it is to secure those 6 Black majority voting districts. And now the real work begins, which is to find people of integrity, people who are, who have their ear to the ground in the communities that they will represent, and to make sure that those who live in those communities can have what they need to thrive, so that we can actually strike a blow to poverty, and strike a blow to discrimination, strike a blow to bend and work together to bend the arc of justice, because that's really what this is about. It's about bending the arc of justice, and this win told us that we can do it. that people coming together in coalition and understanding and doing the work that we need to do to understand these issues and how they affect the average person, that this is a worthy cause, it's a worthy issue and campaign to take up. And so we were just honored and privileged to be invited into this fight, and very grateful, and realizing that if we can win this fight, we can win the other fights for justice that ran. So thank you so much for having me speak with you today.
Thank you, Reverend Meyer, for those very powerful and very inspiring words. And again, I'd like to just take a moment just to let you folks see what it means when we collaborate, when we work together. Reverend Meyer came from an important event earlier this afternoon. She's off to another event for Martin Luther King celebration. And that's how we get things done in this community, when we come together and we work together in a cooperative way. So I thank you for sharing that information. And please, folks, if you want to hear more about the work that she and Robin Wilt and others like that have done, please get in touch and follow up with that. The next person that I've invited to speak on behalf of our coalition building community work that we're doing is a young gentleman by the name of Tyrone Hodge. Tyrone Hodge is a leader in the Poor People's Campaign, and he is a member of the Rochester Homeless Union. Tyrone has worked effortlessly on making people's lives better and improving his life and making our community a better place. So I've asked Tyrone to come up and just share a little bit of his story and his struggle and what it means like to be part of a community that cares, a community that reaches out and works with one another to make it a better place. So Tyrone Hodge, if you'd be kind enough to come and share a few words with us, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I entitled my experience The Fall. It was not the first experience with homelessness, but the most stressful. Neatly dressed, I thought it would go well in my favor, but things didn't go according to plan. The Open Door mission was a small gathering of individuals and staff members who were seemingly polite and concerned. After 2 weeks, I believe, is when I was asked if I was on a case pending with DHS, where I replied that I did not. The individual associates told me that I needed to go and apply, which I did. Go to the social worker, which asked me for receipts to show where I had spent my money, where I did not keep receipts of everything I purchased. I was told, as long as you don't provide receipts, I was not eligible for assistance, which this knowledge, I returned to the shelter and let the attendant know that I was turned down from receiving assistance. After a few moments, I was told I was to be transferred to another location called Brookhaven, where accommodations appeared to be much better than the former. I had my own bed and my own cubicle space. There was a lounging area where you could sit and watch TV. Not having the knowledge of why I had been transferred, I began to get a little comfortable with my surroundings and attempted to think of solutions to my dilemma. After another 2 weeks had ran its course, I was again approached by a staff member questioning my status with DHS, in which I told him that they requested receipts of how I spent my money and were not going to assist me if I don't provide them. The staff member informed me that I had to go again to DHS, even though I had explained to him that they would not help. So off I was to DHS again. This time, the individual that had told me that I was not going to receive assistance She came out aggressively this time and told me, Mr. Hodge, we already told you unless you provide the receipts, you will not receive assistance. With my head held down fully, not understanding the predicament I was in, I returned to the shelter to tell them the news. After the news of my visit to DHS, the social worker that I believe he was at the time, that I inquired as to why do I have to leave? And he told me we don't have a way for your stay here. We don't have a way to pay for your stay here. And I had my last check from Xerox, and I offered to pay. And he said, sorry, Mr. Hodge, that's not how it works. So I was off to this was Brookhaven, and since I didn't know the city that well, I circled back to what I know best was to go back to the open door mission. And this time they had what was a bowl where you picked a number that was attached to a bed. And I picked the number that was not attached to a bed 3 nights in a row and was told that I had to leave. There was the second night I got lucky with a friend that was in the same predicament, and she had met a friend, and the friend offered to keep her the night, and she told the friend not without my friend, which was me. And I slept on the bottom of the bedpost of the gentleman for that night. And I don't remember the third night, but the final night I ended up underneath the bus transit that was not used anymore in Main Street. And it was becoming late in the evening, 12 o'clock, midnight, and I was really frustrated, even to the point of tears, that I didn't know what to do next. And there were 2 individuals that came up to me and said, sir, do you have some place to stay tonight? And I said, no, I do not. And they told me that there was a 24-hour shelter on Hudson Avenue, which was the House of Mercy at the time, that they would accept you. And I hurried up and went there with my 2 pulley bags and a shoulder bag that I had, and got there. And the attendant let me in, and he showed me the sleeping quarters. And you know, if you ever had any chance to have visited the House of Mercy in Hudson, you would know that they were very tight in the quarters, and the attendants would lead me down to where I was to sleep, and he would say, watch this guy's head, watch this lady's arms, because we were really tight quarters. And waking up the next morning, I observed my surroundings and was kind of traumatized about the fact of the 2 other shelters that kicked me out, and was waiting for this shelter to also ask me about attending DSX, which never happened. And a couple of years later, I found out the reason why. And in closing, I want to say that I find that I need to pay this forward for anyone that would be in this type of predicament, that they would also know that there's ways and ask another question and not just receive the first answer you receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Tyrone. I realize that these stories can be long and they can be complex, but so are our lives. Our lives are long and complex and full of many complications. And that's why it's important as a community that we come out and we learn from one another and find ways that we can support each other and come to an understanding of what others' struggles are in their lives. So please, let's welcome Mary Beth Knowles.
As Michael said before I came here tonight, and we do this monthly with the Speaking from the Heart, I was with a group of refugees and American friends from the parish, Spiritus Christi. And every time I meet with this group and have become so close with them that I see them every day, but in our large groups, we hear horrible stories of refugees, asylum seekers that have fled their countries because of war and because of violence. And I just look at these people and I'm thinking this question: what is the true cost of war? There's been studies. The Committee on Veterans Affairs has gone to the U.S. House of Representatives and had a huge session on it. And as a veteran, I know the true cost of war. If you look at just the veterans angle, that obviously serving in a war, in a conflict, there are devastating repercussions. First and foremost is the cost of war is the cost of lives. All lives, not just American lives. There's also soldiers that come home and are without limbs. They've got permanent injuries. PTSD, mental health issues, depression, suicide, homelessness, and really the death of peace, because they can't ever be whole again from the experiences of living through war. But there are other costs of war, and costs that we can't afford, that we should not be facing, and that we will not accept. And these are far-reaching costs that affect all people. Back in 1975, when I was 17, I was graduating high school, I joined the U.S. Army, and I served a 20-year career, and this was as a means to help my own family, my mom, my dad, my 3 siblings, to lift them out of poverty. At the time, I was living in Amsterdam, New York. That's my hometown. And in doing some quick research, I found that in 1975, the military budget was $92 billion. 1975. Well, after a career in the Army, I embarked on a career in teaching. I taught here in the city of Rochester for 20 years at School 45. And it is there that the cold, hard truths smack me clear in the face. The cost of war infects every facet of our society. We are feeding a war machine, but we're not feeding our children. We're paying costs of lives and war, but we're also not housing our people in safe, affordable housing. We continue to feed the war machine, and yet there are children and families that don't have enough to eat. We pay the military members, we buy obscene amounts of weapons of war and machinery, and yet we don't pay a livable wage to families to decently raise their families. So in my classroom, I would have children every day. I taught preschool and kindergarten. But children would come to school. I didn't have any place to sleep last night. We slept in Grandpa's car. I couldn't do my homework. I didn't have a pencil. I couldn't see the papers because they turned off our electricity. I didn't have a home to go to. Many of the children would be
homeless or in temporary housing, and yet again go into another substandard home. And I found out that when homes are being rented out, the landlords do not have to supply stoves or refrigerators. Wow. And all the different stories of my students, the beautiful 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, happy faces and bright spirits and energy and laughter and singing and playing, knowing already the cost of war, the money that we were spending on the war was considered more important than these children having a decent future or decent present. The poverty rate in Rochester right now is 36% here in Rochester alone. And we rank third in overall poverty among the nation's 75 largest metropolitan areas. Nearly half of all children in Rochester live in poverty, the second rate in the nation with a population of 100,000 or more. Those were stark realities I saw every day in my classroom. And just to think that any one of us, not really truly knowing if we have a home to go to at night, if that home is going to be warm, safe, and that all my needs are going to be met because my family has an income that can provide the food we need, the decent place that we're living, and everything associated with living. I wanted to tell you that now, remember 1975, we were paying $92 million in military budget. In 2022, almost 40 years later, $778 billion. And this year, 2023, the number is going to be $817 billion. So I ask us all to think about the true cost of war. It is the cost of lives. It's the cost of all of our lives. And there just has to be a way that we can be able to make sure we take care of everybody. And the far-reaching costs of war, of money spent on war and militarism, and the resultant ecological devastation that war causes the world over, affects everybody, every human being. And thank you very much for your time.